Afternoon, everyone. When I started writing this, I realised this is actually quite a dry subject, so I'm going to try and make it as exciting as possible for you. So I'm looking at the Disabled Facilities Grant delivery guidance for local authorities in England, and I've pulled out various things from it that I think would be useful for you to know. I'm also going to link it to bathing. So I want to make it really clear that this is about England only, because the Disabled Facilities Grant policy or equivalent is devolved to each country. This is just about England, but there's very good websites around Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, which will give you a guide to their policies and procedures. So the aim of the session is to give you a quick refresh on key components of the Disabled Facilities Grant, overview of 3 key areas within the new guidance and their implication on practice. So I just want to start with our homes are more than bricks and mortar. The built environment has a direct and indirect effect on our physical and mental health, and the evidence is so strong that that's the case. And I think if our homes are not fit for us to live in, it not only impacts us as an individual, but it can impact our family, our ability to engage with the things that we want to do and choose to do, and can cause quite significant mental health issues. The DFG was introduced in the Housing Grants Construction and Regeneration Act 1996, and I hope you all know that. And the aim was to make changes to a person's home so they can continue to live there. At that point, you had to be considered registrable as disabled, and this was under the definition of the National Assistance Act 1948. Thankfully, that has been superseded by the definition of disability in the Equality Act, which says somebody who has a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal daily activities, which is very much more of an OT sort of definition, but gives you a very broader base on that kind of normal activities, because what's normal to me might not be normal to you. And we need to understand what our client's normal is, and that can only be done through assessment and effective communication. So to give you a bit of history about why we've got this guidance now, in 2018, a review was undertaken by the University of West of England, and that resulted in the publication of the document Disabled Facilities Grants and Other Adaptations, an external review. One of the key recommendations was new guidance should be set out the expectations for local authorities in administering the DFG and the rights of disabled person making an application for the grant. And the key to this recommendation was clearer guidance. And what's been produced is this guidance called the Disabled Facilities Grants Delivery Guidance for Local Authorities. It was published in March 2022. It is clearer. It doesn't answer all of our questions. It's not perfect, but the one thing I will say about it is actually very readable, and it is worth downloading it and working through it. The one thing it does do, it's a lot clearer on who is eligible. So under eligibility, it says this includes autistic people, those with mental health conditions, physical disabilities, learning disabilities, cognitive impairments such as dementia, and progressive conditions such as motor neurone disease. It also includes those people suffering from age-related disabilities and those with terminal illness. That is quite far-reaching, and from somebody who's worked in the Disabled Facilities Grant or Adaptations field for over 30 years, whereas traditionally it was very physically focused, it now has a broader eligibility. The only thing that I found in this is that it doesn't specifically talk about sensory needs. However, we know that some people who have autism maybe have sensory needs. We know that people who have dementia might have sensory needs as well. So I think as occupational therapists, we could probably very quickly include this within the eligibility. And that sensory needs can include, all the aspects of sensory requirements. So I think we can still manage to eke into that eligibility. So the Disabled Facilities Grant within this document says it can be actually fund things in 3 ways. And the first one, which we probably all know anyway, which is approving DFGs in accordance with the Housing Grants Construction and Regeneration Act. And those are all the things that say facilitate access to. So when it comes to bathing, it talks very clearly in that primary legislation and says facilitating access by the disabled occupant to or providing for the disabled occupant a room in which there is a bath or shower or both, or facilitating the use of the disabled occupant of such a facility. And I think what we have to remember with all these sections of this part of the grant is that we need to remember that it's not just providing a room where there's a kitchen or a room where there is a bath, but actually that the client can actually use that facility. And that facility meets their needs. So, for example, say in bathing, if you are putting in a bath for personal hygiene, which is really important, but you're wanting to put some lighting in because that also helps with managing their sensory behaviour, or you find that somebody who's autistic prefers a bath with lighting, we need to make sure we use that and use of that facility. And be very clear about why, under our clinical reason, that we're including that feature and benefit of that product. The second one, which again, hopefully you all know about, is providing housing assistance in accordance with the locally published housing assistance policy. And this is under the, what most of us will know as the RRO, or the Regulatory Reform Order powers. And each authority must have a published policy on what can be funded. I was very interested to have a email conversation with Rachel Russell from Foundations, because one of the things this year that government have set out is that they must provide in their returns to Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities a link to their published policy. So if you're working across boundaries, Foundations are going to put a link on their website with access to all those policies, which will be really useful for us to know. But the RRO gave us far more scope to look at how we fund things, and it include provisions to help to move to a more suitable home, help with access and use of new build homes, simple systems of provision. It talked about not means testing for adaptations under £6,000, fast tracking for clients with limited or life-limiting conditions. So it was trying to give the local authorities a way of not necessarily going through the processes set out in the primary legislation, but actually being able to work more flexibly around individual needs. And this has been very, very popular in different areas. My main concern as a clinician is it does produce a postcode lottery. So you could be in one authority where they will fund a simple installation of a stair lift very, very quickly, but your neighbour who actually is in a different local authority might have to wait for the Disabled Facilities Grant process, and you're causing that kind of inequity around provision. However, I think as occupational therapists, we really should be trying to influence the RRO policies and what would make our clients' life easier if we could get that into that process to make sure that adaptations are provided in a timely manner to actually meet the client's needs. So I think maybe one of the things that I would challenge you to do is today is go away, read your policy. Is it fit for purpose? Can we make recommendations for change that will make a positive impact for our clients? And the third one is using a portion of the DFG funding for other social care capital funding purposes. I've not heard very much about this. I've only got one example, and it would be interesting to hear from you if you've got any local initiatives that actually use this as capital funding. So the one thing that was used recently in a local authority in the north of England was using some of their DFG funding to fund a kind of step down from hospitals, so rehab facilities for people so they could improve their function prior to going home, or they could move out of hospital to stay there while their adaptations were happening. So it was kind of preventing that bed blocking, but moving people forwards in suitable accommodation. So just coming back to the DFG, these things you will all know. It's a mandatory grant. It is actually the only mandatory grant that actually is out there now. And because of that, I think we need to be very protective of it and realise the huge value that's put on it for health and social care from central government. But also what we need to do is we need to challenge when our authorities are going, we have no money, or the DFG budget has run out. Actually, that is unlawful because they have a legal duty to do it within the bounds of the legislation, but they do have a legal duty to do it. And one thing I always say in the Abacus Lunch and Learns is they should be stopping things that are non-essential to fund the DFG, and that could be stopping flowers on roundabouts or provision of libraries, which sound horrific, but if you've got somebody who cannot access their toilet, where do our priorities lay? We know it's means tested, and for children under the age of 18 and 364 days, that's not the case. So I always say, get your children's adaptations in as soon as possible, because it gives you that non-means tested situation for that child. It's tenure blind. So regardless of what property you live in, be it your own property, private rented, housing association, almshouses, you have a right to apply. Now I know, and you guys will be completely aware of the fact that if you're in, say, council housing or housing association property, it will give you, they would like to fund those adaptations often through their rent monies. So they don't tend to apply for a disabled facilities grant. And just to give you a hint, or Foundations produced a very good guidance recently on housing associations and adaptations. And then the other two key facts about the DFG is the necessary, appropriate, and reasonable and practical. The necessary and appropriate is about the individual. Is the adaptation necessary, and is what we're recommending appropriate? And that part of the process is usually put in the hands of the occupational therapy do it. And that is around the built environment. They shouldn't really be challenging your clinical judgment. They should be saying, yes, we can do this with this house. So to give you a really good example, I had a house once where it was a relatively new built property. It was an owner occupier. We were looking at putting in a through floor lift for a client when the housing officer went out and actually realised that the construction of this building meant that the floors were actually concrete, so they weren't wooden. So actually the cost of drilling into that concrete to put a through floor lift in was astronomical, and it came to the point where it wasn't reasonable and practicable to do it. And actually the choice was, does this individual move? And they did move in the end because we couldn't work out a way of doing it. So let's come to the new guidance. What am I doing on time? I'm fine on time. It's actually quite an interesting document, and I don't say this often, but actually it's a government document that's very easy to read. So I think, as I said before, you should go away and read it, because it's not one of those ones that you'll fall asleep to. And what really impacted me on the new guidance and the guiding principles was it really talks about the person, the environment and the occupation. And to me, that is a joy to read, because we can use this guidance to actually move forwards with some of the adaptations that we may get a little bit stuck on, or there's a little bit of pushback. Is this, reasonable and practicable to do? So in the guidance, it talks about an adaptation is there to reduce the risk. The guiding principles are there to reduce the risk of installing inappropriate adaptations. And the authorities should follow the 9 guiding principles identified by Francis Hayward in 2004. And I decided to put this image in because I thought, an accessible toilet in a festival situation is fit for purpose, isn't it? It meets your needs. You can see your bands, you can go to the lavatory, you can do your ablutions, and you can come out and see more bands. But it's about, is this an appropriate adaptation for somebody's home? And hopefully you'd all say no. So it's about an appropriate adaptation at the appropriate time for that individual. So what are the guiding principles? Well, the first one is need to retain or restore dignity. I don't think any of us would question the fact that it is not dignified to be using a commode in a living room because you can't access your toilet upstairs. And actually to be able to do that quickly and efficiently and independently is really important. So the first one is dignity. The second one is recognising our clients' values and understanding what their values are and how that impacts on our recommendations that we've discussed with them and what is necessary and appropriate. But this one really hit home when it came to bathing. The need for relief from pain, discomfort and danger. There is so much evidence out there that submersion in water can reduce pain and discomfort. And if you go onto the Abacus Academy website, there is a whole webinar around sleep and how sleep can be improved by bathing. So we need to remember that pain relief can be part of an adaptation and get away from that almost medical model, isn't it? So pain is about a health issue, therefore can't come into the DFG. Well, it very clearly can now because of these guiding principles. The need to minimise barriers to independence, I don't think any of us would question that at all, and would probably say that's what we're doing day in, day out. The need for some element of choice. This is quite an interesting one, isn't it? About that kind of balance between choice and the fact that you're using public money. But if we don't communicate, which I think is the next one, see, if we don't communicate as part of choice, how are we meeting our clients' needs? And certainly what came up in Francis Hayward's work in 2004, which was under the Money Well Spent document, was you can provide adaptations which physically meet the needs of the client, but because it wasn't the choice of the parents, that adaptation was almost like a white elephant, it wasn't used. And she gave a couple of examples where ground floor extensions had been completed for a child with complex conditions, and it was a lovely sized room, it had ensuite facilities. But both of these parents said that their children were so young, so one was 6 and one was 8, I think, that they didn't like to leave their child downstairs on their own. And even with modern technology, they didn't feel comfortable about leaving their child with these significant needs on their own. So we're ending up still carrying their child up the stairs because that's where they wanted to have their child next to them, close to them, so they could manage them. And it's sometimes, are we actually thinking about the values of this family, the choice of what's going to work for them, and communicating potential options? And of course, that has a massive impact on budgets if you're suddenly looking at 2-story extensions. But what we shouldn't be doing is be blinkered by budgets. We should actually be advocating for our clients based on good assessment and clinical reasoning. So, and we need to communicate with our clients as part of giving choice, but also about explaining the process. I don't know about you, but you look at it and the next bit I'm going to talk about, and you suddenly realise actually it is a very complex process, and a lot of people are dealing with significant other barriers in their life because of a disability, and this is just one part of it. So something that's complex can be very difficult to understand. So 7 is need for light. I don't know about you, but I feel so much better when I have proper daylight or reasonable daylight light bulbs. But 8 and 9, these are key to me, especially when it comes to bathing. We need to understand the particular needs of children to provide for growth and change and the need for space. Again, if you have your own children, you would be looking at this anyway, so we should be looking at it for our clients. But we also need to understand that a child is not an individual on their own. They sit within part of a family, and that could be a single mum, or it could actually, with no other siblings, or it could actually be, you know, an extended family. 3-generational families are very common now, where you've got different needs from different individuals. And if we don't look at what's required by that child and other family members, are we actually meeting probably our professional ethics, but also these guiding principles? So we know that it's easier to bathe a child than it is to shower a child. If we do take the bath out and put a shower in, have we considered mum who might have fibromyalgia and likes to bathe to improve pain? Have we thought about the client's siblings and the fact that can they shower? Is it right? Have we considered that actually mum would like to bathe her children together? Or that dad enjoys that time with the children at bath time? It's just trying to have a better understanding of the impact of our assessment and recommendation and whether we are actually listening to our clients around what the family needs, as well as what our client needs. And I think most of us would understand and argue that children don't stay one size, so don't design for a child, you design for an adult who is a child at the moment, which will then give you space for growth and change, which is key. So there's a question for you, challenge to go away and reflect on, are we using these principles now as part of our occupational therapy assessment and recommendation? And I think for me, I quite like to print them out and put them on my wall because it's a really clear reminder about what we should be doing, that we are advocates for our clients and not gatekeepers for our authorities. So I want to go on next to timescales. Oh, and this is going to be controversial, and it's really challenged me as an individual. So according to the document, there are 5 key stages of delivering a home adaptation, and I don't think any of us would question this. So the first stage is what they call stage 0, which is first contact with the service. So that is literally, you know, the initial referral from the individual, the professional, whoever it is, a family member. That's the initial stage. Then the third stage is the first contact to assessment and identification of the relevant works. And that's the OT's part of necessary and appropriate. And I need to go through these stages, it'll make sense later. The second stage is identifying the relevant works for the submission to make up that formal grant application. And stage 3 is the grant application to grant approval, so that these stage 2 and 3 sit with housing. And then we've got stage 4 is approval and the works being carried out and the necessary checks of those completed works. I think that's very clear, and in the guidance they have a lovely little diagram showing you how this works and how it should smoothly move along. I think it's really important to look at the first contact though, because the first contact is key, and I'm not sure whether we're getting it right, but that's a point where you give good information. You explain the grants that are eligible and the eligibility. And at this point, I would often use the Foundation's Test of Resources website. If you go onto Foundations, your clients can fill in various information of their financial situation, and it will give a general calculation of what their contribution will be. And I think it's really important to be upfront about how much somebody is likely to have to pay. And anybody can go on it. It's really useful. I've used it a number of times, mainly in my area where we're working privately and we want to prove to whoever's funding it that we won't get any statutory funding. And actually it's a really good way of doing that. But also to send information on the DFG, the eligibility, alternative provision. It might be that they're just seeking advice on something and actually don't need to go past first contact into assessment. They just need to be signposted to a different service provision. And it also, I think it's about being very clear about waiting lists at this point and showing informing people of the complaints process and the compliments process, because we do good jobs. So I think at that point, it's also important to try and understand the urgency of the referral. So that kind of stage 1, that first contact, is really important. So that assessment is the one that I was talking about previously. This includes the assessment and specification, design and communication with the client, and all the other necessary organisations and professions that we need to contact to create a good specification that our clients are happy with, that can then move through to housing around the application for eligibility and whether it is reasonable and practicable to do that work. So I don't have time to discuss this now, but I really wanted to raise it, which is, if you read the report, it talks to you about prioritisation, who can carry out the assessment, what constitutes as urgent, what is complex, and puts together a lovely little diagram of how you can prioritise your cases and hopefully meet the needs of individuals at the best time for them and their family needs. So here we go. I'm just going to put up this and maybe leave it for 5 seconds. So the new guidance actually puts in timescales. So to give you an example, something that's urgent and simple could be somebody returning home from hospital, can't access the toilet, is using a commode. What you might need to do is put in a stair lift. And what they're saying is, from the point of assessment to the point that that stair lift should go in, should take no longer than 55 days. That's 11 weeks. It is happening. Not everywhere, but it is happening. And I think it's important that we try and push to these timescales, but I did actually put down here realistic, aspirational, client-focused. I think they're very client-focused. This is pushing us as therapists, it's pushing our grants teams as administrators of this grant, how realistic it is, I am not sure. I don't know about your experiences, but if we've got a kind of non-urgent complex case where they're saying it should be completed within 36 weeks, actually we're finding that we're having to wait for builders for a considerable number of months because they're full. And if you want a certain builder with the skills and aptitudes of working with that individual client and working around that client's needs, because the adaptation is happening while they're still in the home, you have to be, as a grants department and as an OT, confident that a particular builder can do that piece of work. So, you know, it's some of these timelines or timescales are influenced by things outside our ability to manage them. And we just need to be aware of that. So just looking at, say, stage 1 on something that's urgent and simple, it's saying it should take a week. So 5 working days for the occupational therapist to go out, assess a need, make recommendations, complete a specification, and pass it on to the housing team to action. Actually, I don't think that's unreasonable. I think we can do that. It's just that maybe we need to look at how we plan our diaries differently, not taking on too much work. So if you're in a local authority, so you have some space within your staff to actually do these urgent and simple cases within this timeline. And I think it is possible. But we just maybe need to look at how we manage our workforce. Is it realistic? I think we should always have something to aim for, but understand that things do get in the way. But I also wanted to talk about bathing, and I feel I haven't touched on it quite as much as I should have done. But stage 4, which is this, you've got your grant approved and the work's going to be carried out, and your builder's going on site. Can we get specialist equipment within these timeframes? And I did have a word with Abacus. They said if something is urgent, they could get one of their bars out and on site within 20 days. So, going back to that, as long as you ordered the bath at the beginning of the process, you could get your bath in place to meet your client's needs. And certainly, with all these others, the standard is 40 days for a bath provision, just going back there. So actually you can meet it in all the non-urgent, complex or urgent and complex needs, as long as the bath is ordered at the beginning of the process of the building work. So from a perspective of specialist equipment, I think most providers could actually provide their equipment in the within the timescales of stage 4. So, and I think with these timescales, again, it is about not panicking about the timescales, but actually going, okay, we've got a client who has a really serious need, and there's a blockage here. So what is that blockage? How can we advocate for our clients? Is it that we will only use, say, a certain lift company for provision of lifts because they're on the preferred contractors list, but they're saying it's going to take 12 weeks for a lift? What we can do is we can say we need to look at alternative provision because we're not meeting the timescales. So it's trying to advocate for our clients and not be restricted by processes that have been put in place for ease, but sometimes also create a barrier for provision. And finally, more of time, it's about, there's a whole lot of work about new guidance. I've put the toilet seats on because you'll understand in the next slide. So according to the Medical and Health Products Regulation Agency, assistive technology refers to products or systems that support and assist individuals with disabilities, restricted mobilities, or other impairments to perform functions that might otherwise be difficult or impossible. So assistive technology is always generally brings up in people's minds, things like assisted bars. It talks about toilets, it talks about hoists. We all understand that, but actually we need to look at the wider definition of technology, because actually the world is changing and technology is at our fingertips with our smartphones now. And assistive technology in its wider form can be included as part of the DFG to maximise the benefits of home adaptations. And they've got some really clear guidance. It's really useful. And kind of bringing this back to bathing, what I said before, is if the technology of being able to voice operate your music while you're in the bath, and that calms you down because you have behaviours that challenge, then we can use that within the grant and it can be funded by the grant. But to go into a little bit more detail around technology, it comes under this controlling sources of power, light and heat. And they say they want it to be a bit more broader to the environment. So smart lighting can be remotely turned on and off, made brighter or dim, change colour, synchronised with other devices. So again, that can be funded under the DFG. So if you have got somebody who, for example, has complex needs to spend the afternoon in bed for bed rest, for postural requirements, you can link up their system to turn their lighting on and off, open and close their curtains. This can come under the DFG. I know we can go to health for some funding, but you can also get this funding under the DFG. Things like smart thermostats, where they can learn a client's preferences. Those again can be controlled, can be funded by the DFG. So to give you a great example where we're looking at energy efficiency at the moment, how can we reduce our energy bills? We could say we've got a client who their work routine isn't regular, so they might be home at 3, they might be home at 5. If they've got a smart thermostat that they can control when they're kind of getting in their car to go home, so the house is warm when they arrive, that can be funded under the DFG. And not to name any names, but Hive is one of the ones that is really good on that. But also we can use things around voice applications. So you can actually fund things like Amazon Echo and all these Alexas through the DFG or through your RRO policy to actually enable somebody to live independently in their own home. You can look at all the new smart infrared control power sockets where you can turn on all sorts of things in your property by the switch, by your iPhone, your iPad, or somebody's eye gaze. People can now control their whole environment through their eye gaze. And then automatic lights and switches, and which are voice command operated. But we can also look at a whole technology situation under the DFG, which can include, things that we generally know about, things like central heating and music and smart media. But also, the video intercoms can be linked to your iPads or your eye gaze system now. But there can also be things around safeguarding incorporated into these home technologies now. So if somebody has not gone out of their bedroom, it sends a warning to a third person. So that somebody has not got up, and you can contact them via voicemail, by phone, whatever way you want to communicate to make sure somebody's okay. I mean, the other interesting things are coming up that absolutely fascinate me is that you're going to be able to turn your oven on remotely and heat up food that you have packaged in a certain way freshly, which then when the carer comes in at 5 o'clock, they literally get it out, plate it up, put it in front of your clients. So actually they're getting fresh food, not processed food, but also you're saving time for care costs, and actually that carer can spend the 15 minutes having a chat with somebody rather than preparing a microwave meal, which means you get a double benefit of freshly prepared food in this new system of vacuum packing, and also you get that social interaction with a carer. That can all be funded under the DFG. And finally, because I know I'm going to be told I'm running out of time, is about connectivity, because technology costs, an ongoing cost of technology costs. But what you can do again under the DFG is fund things like wireless routers, Wi-Fi signal extenders. So if your Wi-Fi is not particularly good, you can use the BT hubs and put that cost within the DFG. If you want to put it in as cabling, that can all come under the DFG. And then the one thing that is, again, with the cost of living crisis really important, it cannot pay for ongoing costs. However, the guidance does state that extended warranties or a service plan, if purchased upfront as part of the time of installation, can be considered as part of the grant award. So say you're putting in a huge kind of home hub situation where somebody can independently manage their own home. If you're putting your wireless router in, you can actually ask your grants department if they will fund 2 years of funding of that maintenance of that cost, just as you would, the extended warranty on your Abacus bath. You would do the same and say, we want 2 years worth of internet access. And actually internet access is not as expensive as it used to be. And there's some really good plans out there. We've just recently got one for somebody at £14 a month. And actually over a 2-year period, that's not a huge amount of money to give somebody independence, dignity, choice over their environment. But with anything around technology, the assessment needs to be needs to be there, and a clear clinical reasoning about what you're trying to achieve for your client. And I think it's about, will these technologies help your individual and make their life more dignified? And, again, it comes around to bathing. To bring it back to bathing at last, is most people would choose to bathe either with a partner or on their own, unless you're a child. And if you're able to control your environment through voice activation, so you can turn on your music, you can change your lighting, it all has an impact. And we need to remember that we need to provide a dignified approach to adaptations for our clients, and that we're not there to give away everything, but we are there to clinically reason what is really necessary and appropriate for our clients. And remember that technology is changing all the time. Look at what's out there. Things really are changing quite quickly. And look in the mainstream, because what's coming up in the mainstream is really quite exciting. And I think our knowledge needs to be up to date. So that's me, gone over a little bit in time, but are there any questions?
Thanks, Kate. I've been both typing furiously and taking notes. So I'm not going to dive straight in with the timescales questions. I'm going to give you a bit of a breather on that one, because as you can imagine, I'm sure that there was a few comments on that. My first question was going to be about, a couple of people are saying that not all grants officers are approving adaptations with sensory elements, but also considering maybe some of the technology-based adaptations you were talking about that are fundable through DFG as luxuries. So but there was what I thought was a brilliant response to that within the chat, and it also fed into what I was going to feed back, is that I think we need to start moving away from that ableist attitude, in that something might be seen as something shouldn't be seen as a luxury for one group and therefore not another. If we expect it as part of our normal lives and routine, why should that be a luxury for somebody else? That was my initial response to that. Have you got anything? Is there anything additional to feedback on that, Kate?
I think it comes back to what the primary principles or the guiding it's the guiding principles of what the Disabled Facilities Grant for. This is, we should get away from this, we are giving something to somebody, therefore it needs to be cheap, ugly and awful. What we need to be doing is standing back and going, this grant is about enabling dignity and control and choice over your environment. And if a grants officer is saying, oh, that's a luxury, or we don't do that equipment, we need to actually bring up this guidance and go, here's the guiding principles. This is what it says. I have literally cut and pasted a whole load of stuff about technology. This wasn't me interpreting what they're saying. This is me literally cutting and pasting into the presentation. So it's that we need to challenge. We need to advocate for our clients.
Yeah, I suppose then the follow-up question to that is, well, obviously it still needs to be necessary. Otherwise, yes, you can't then be recommended in the first place. But the more of that kind of technology we recommend, or the more things that fit within the scope of DFG, the more likely we are then to push that 30,000 boundary, that ceiling. At what point does that £30,000 ceiling then have to shift, given rising costs elsewhere, for us to be able to encapsulate all of those things that might be needed and completely appropriate to recommend, before we're then delaying the process by having to go and outsource other areas of funding to top it up?
I think we need to be smarter. I think, one, we need to look at the recent case law in Islington, whereby the judge actually said his interpretation of the primary legislation was, under those 12 aspects of facilitating access to, he believed you could attribute 30,000 to each. So that's not been challenged yet, but you can also run concurrent DFGs. You don't have to wait 5 years for another DFG. So you could run, say, an adaptation, a DFG for the, say, the bricks and mortar, and then follow it with a DFG for technology. There's nothing in the primary legislation that says you can't do that. There's also in the RRO policies where you can do top-ups. So, you've got your 30,000 in England, and your policy might be that we can add in another 20, 30,000 on top. We are still hoping central government is going to look at upping that limit. And I know there's conversations going on in the background about that at the moment. When the review originally happened, a lot of occupational therapists, including myself, were saying we need an upper limit of 50,000. And so hopefully, with the building costs as they are, central government will look at that. Okay. I can't promise anything in the present situation.
No, that's interesting advice. I know we've done a fair bit of work together, Kate, both for Abacus and beyond, about DFG and future-proofing. As well. Where might that fit, where one of the recommendations might be for something that isn't needed necessarily now, but will be in the future, alongside something that is needed now? Would the same thing work about that concurrent application?
Yeah, I think it's again about, sitting down with all the people involved and saying, okay, we know this person doesn't need hoisting at the moment, for example, but we do know that this person will need hoisting in the future. Classic one, motor neurone disease. Client is not ready at that particular point to accept that that is a need. But what you can discuss is, during that adaptation process, putting in tracking, embedded tracking in the ceiling with all the fuse points. So retrofitting a cassette is a day's job. So it's trying to be savvy at the time of big bills, to put the infrastructure in place, or what I call a first fix, the electrics that are required, so you can retrofit things. And future-proofing is so key. So to give you an example around a bath or a shower, there's no reason why a bath is right at the moment, but we know long-term it might have to be a shower. We don't know that, but actually the cost of putting a shower under the bath at the time of build is negligible. So why aren't we doing both? It's about thinking more strategically rather than just what's happening on this Tuesday morning in September.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point and a really good tip, and it's something we've talked on at more length, I know, both for Abacus and some of that information and webinar is on the Abacus Academy website. I know we've done a bit for Closemat in the past on that as well, that people can go and have a look at. We haven't got an awful lot more time, but and this isn't a question, but as you can imagine, lots of comments about timescales, Kate. And I think just some general, not necessarily concerns, but comments about those timescales are fantastic, but actually from an infrastructure perspective, from a resource perspective, it's like, a central government manifesto of this is what we're going to do, but without necessarily the detail of how we're going to do it. And that idea of 5 days, even for an urgent, strict non-complex case, might seem on the face of it absolutely fine, but if you just don't have staff on the ground to meet that 5 days, it's just a huge challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no question about it. When I looked at those timescales, I was somewhat stunned and wondered where they got their evidence for that being realistic. Yeah. 11 weeks for that first urgent non-complex, it's very tight. But then I thought, although they've put days under everything, under each stage, I think the stages could overlap. So you could still be filling in your forms around, number 2. 1 and 2 can actually be squeezed together, I think. So the grants department can be doing their test of resources while you're still doing your assessment. So I think what we need to do is try not to get too bogged down with the days, but actually look at the end timescales. So the end timescales, I think, is more important than the individual breakdowns. And if you've got something that's urgent, so to get, maybe to give you an example, somebody can get to the toilet but can't actually wash and dry themselves, so they need care to support them. How quickly can we get an assessment of a wash dry toilet? You know, Abacus do them. You don't necessarily need to go one route. You could go through Abacus. It's just working out ways of doing things as quickly as possible to get that kit or that adaptation in place. And maybe we just need to look at a little bit more flexibility about, dare I say it, qualified versus unqualified staff. Is it about, do you outsource some of your kind of longer term work because that's more easily manageable, and you concentrate your staff on that short term quick intervention to try and get things moving quickly? I would agree timescales are scary.
Yeah, and I think I would agree there are things creatively that we can do as therapists and as therapy teams to support that. I guess what people would say, and I would agree with as well, is that there are elements of those timescales that are actually outside of the clinician's control. Just
Absolutely.
finding a tradesman, finding a X, Y, and Z, you know, finding materials for the tradesman. And my worry with the timescales, although I think they're fantastic and that they're incredibly client focused, will continue to build pressure on the therapists in an already quite highly pressurized environment. We're not gonna have time for any more. I'm really sorry. We're getting towards the end of our hour, and I know everybody who's on is probably going to need to go back to work after their lunch break. Kate, thanks so much for that presentation. It was absolutely fantastic, and the feedback on the chat's brilliant. For people still on the chat, thanks so much for joining us. To confirm, you'll get a certificate of attendance, and this recorded webinar will be available to you via link in an email, which you'll be sent, but also on the Abacus Academy website within the next couple of weeks. So thanks for your comments, thanks for your questions, thanks for being so engaged. It was a really brilliant hour. And Kate, once again, thanks very much, and we'll see you all again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.